The plot to gag free speech is increasing in different facets of public communication platforms, and the voices behind this evil plot are no longer underground.
We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. And if you profit off of hate, if you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable as a community.
It's important for our security when we've got our top spy saying that mis and disinformation poses a threat to our democracy. We also have the head of defence saying the same thing, our regulators saying the same thing. And we know that some 75% of Australians are concerned about the harmful impacts of mis and disinformation. This really goes to not only protecting Australians, but protecting our democratic way of life.
So the war on free speech is seeking to gain momentum as agents of a totalitarian state seek to create a system where their opinions, ideas, and propositions to the nations of the world are never criticized or constructively interrogated.
When they talk about free speech is only free if it's their narrative. It's not free if it's not consistent with their narrative. They shut you down. They say they cancel you.
What this government is doing is trading away the free speech of ordinary Australians, not to protect us, as they claim, but to protect themselves from criticism. The Albanese government's first attempt at a censorship bill was roundly criticised for restricting free speech and putting the power in the hands of bureaucrats and big tech to decide what is true and what is false. This second attempt may be even worse. Once again, it is based on the principle that government and the bureaucracy and big tech will decide for you what is true or false, or what is right or wrong. To tell you that your opinions are harmful and dangerous, but only, of course, if your opinion is different to that of the government, because what the government says will, of course, be exempt from being considered misinformation.
Anyone who uses the phrase disinformation is a liar. Period. We're done.
God bless that man.
Disinformation is not a category. There's only one category: truth or falsehood. That's it. Disinformation is another way of saying you're saying something that's inconvenient to me. You are criticizing me. I don't like what you're saying. Shut up or go to jail. That's not a valid category. That's totalitarianism. That's tyranny. So anyone who uses the word disinformation is immediately on the liar's side. Don't listen to another word. That person is your enemy.
This bill is about giving the government more power, and essentially what this bill does is allows the government to decide what the truth is. So if you think about George Orwell's 1984 and that dystopia that he presented there was a Ministry of Truth. And essentially what the Albanese government is proposing is to create a Ministry of Truth, and the government will determine what is true. And if you don't comply with the dominant ideology of the establishment and their version of truth, then you will be shut down. So I am really concerned about this. This is the most dangerous law that I have seen in my time as a legal academic.
I urge everyone to prepare a submission and let the Albanese government know what we think of this authoritarian bill. This disgraceful legislation policing so-called misinformation and disinformation will undermine democracy as we know it.
The revelations of truths that foiled the COVID pandemic of 2020 has instigated the evil trinity of WHO, UNO, and WEF to declare any narrative contrary to theirs misinformation.
The real culprits behind the war against free speech is not your politician. It's not those politicians there. No. There are major companies who are doing bad and terrible things in the world, and they don't like those things to be known. They are the ones pressurizing the politicians to censor free speech. They really think they control the world. WEF, for example, believes they control the nations. Oh no, he is deceived. And so are the WHO and several others. There's several other companies.
So the World Economic Forum's annual meeting is underway in Davos, Switzerland. Now, last year, disinformation stole the spotlight and was featured as a key problem for global elites to address. This year, the WEF has upped the ante, releasing a report that lists misinformation and disinformation as the #1 short-term risk facing the world, beating out interstate armed conflict, climate change, and lack of economic opportunity.
According to Organic Consumer website, Pfizer CEO, who said online misinformation is criminal, is found guilty of misleading vaccine statements. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, last year at the Atlantic Council, called people who spread COVID-19 vaccine misinformation criminals, in his calls for censorship of misinformation online. However, this year, Dr. Bourla is himself found responsible by the UK's pharmaceutical regulator of making misleading statements about vaccination of children.
There is a very small part of professionals which they circulate on purpose misinformation so that they will mislead those that they have concerned. Those people are criminals. They're not bad people, they're criminals because they literally costed millions of lives.
Big pharmaceutical companies and other interest groups that want to control the debate, they realize that if they go out and publicly say, we're going to censor Alex Berenson, we're going to censor Michael Schellenberger, we're going to censor X, Y, and Z journalists or activists who disagrees with us, society would not react positively to that. There would be a big backlash. So what they do is they fund third-party groups that seemingly seem removed from the pharmaceutical companies, which then dictate to Twitter, social media platforms, and other stakeholders who to censor, who to deboost, to start attacking and policing any kind of criticism of the vaccine, any kind of vaccine hesitancy, any kind of vaccine skepticism, broadly labeling any kind of critique of corporate profits even as a dangerous form of vaccine misinformation.
This is what is going on. They're telling the people they have to fight misinformation. What they're trying to do is to rob you of your right to free speech, the ability to express yourself any way you want to. The point is, they want only their narrative to be heard because they're not happy that their plans for COVID-19 failed. And they're blaming those who had the right to speak.
The greatest perpetrator of misinformation during the pandemic has been the United States government. Misinformation that COVID was spread through surface transmission, that vaccinated immunity was far greater than natural immunity, that masks were effective. Now we have the definitive Cochrane review. What do you do with that review? Cochrane is the most authoritative evidence body in all of medicine and has been for decades. Do you just ignore it, not talk about it? That myocarditis was more common after the infection than the vaccine. Not true. It's 4 to 28 times more common after the vaccine. That young people benefit from a booster. Misinformation. Our two top experts on vaccines quit the FDA in protest over this particular issue, pushing boosters in young, healthy people. The data was never there. That's why the CDC never disclosed hospitalization rates among boosted Americans under age 50.
Free speech is the bedrock of democracy, and as Benjamin Franklin said, there is no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. The bill compels digital platform providers like X and Facebook to censor content that may contribute to serious harm. But who makes that decision? Who's the arbitrator of truth? The biggest peddler of misinformation during the pandemic were the government and unelected health bureaucrats. That's because they falsely claimed that the experimental gene-based mRNA injections were safe and effective, when this was not supported by the available evidence, even from the pharmaceutical companies themselves. Falsely claimed the senseless vaccine mandates would help stop transmission when they were never tested for that. Falsely claimed the COVID injections would keep you from getting COVID, getting seriously ill or going to hospital. Falsely claimed masks prevented transmission or infection. Falsely claimed it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Falsely claimed that early treatments were unsuitable. falsely claimed there was no clinical evidence to support ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine in the treatment of COVID-19. And worst of all, the vilification and censorship of doctors, academics and scientists who raised the alarm about the safety of the vaccines.
I just testified before Congress, and of course those on the left were asking about misinformation as if that was the big problem. And of course, microchips in the vaccines as a conspiracy theory came up. Now, I don't know how many people chose not to get the vaccine because of fears of a microchip. Maybe 2 people in America or 5? How about the misinformation propagated by public health officials? The biggest deliverer of misinformation has been the United States government, and the data has caught up with all the lies now and has actually debunked many of these lies.
This is one reason they're not very happy about free speech. And so they're declaring war on what they call misinformation. But the truth of the matter is, they are the ones responsible for disinformation. And they want to criminalize misinformation.
There has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
Both Kamala Harris and her vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, have both endorsed government censorship. I mean, it's shocking to say government censorship of what we're allowed to say online. They're trying to censor X, formerly Twitter, not because there's misinformation there, but because there's information there, there's truth there that governments don't want us to see. You know, one of the tells that you know that these are government people trying to censor us is that they never talk about the misinformation that the governments have been putting out. The governments put out misinformation about so many different things, whether it's the idea that the vaccines will prevent you from getting COVID, or that it did not come from a lab. We've seen hoax after hoax from government officials spreading disinformation. They're trying to shut down the social media platforms, not because they're sources of misinformation, but because they're sources of accurate information that contradicts the propaganda and the disinformation that the politicians themselves and these government officials are putting out.
Recently, certain other public figures called for severe punishment for misinformation on social media platforms.
We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control.
This then reveals how fickle people become when this free speech doesn't favor their narrative. People like Hillary Clinton cannot be trusted because while she recently called for censorship of free speech, many years ago she advocated publicly for free speech.
And censorship should not be in any way accepted by any company from anywhere. And in America, American companies need to make a principled stand. This needs to be part of our national brand. No nation, no group, no individual should stay buried in the rubble of oppression. We cannot stand by while people are separated from the human family by walls of censorship.
Meanwhile, a few years ago, people were very happy with all of these platforms because they thought, now we can express ourselves the way we want to. They said, this is free speech, wow. So in one breath, they talk about having democracy, it's important. But these are not democracy friendly by any standard. And that's why they condemn and redefine free speech. In the guise of protecting the public from misinformation, while they peddle disinformation.
The people that the Biden administration thinks are the real threat to America, it's not the drug cartels, it's not foreign threats, it's you, it's the American people. Yeah. If you have questions about COVID, if you have questions about COVID masks, if you have questions about the COVID vaccine, this administration wanted you to be monitored. This disinformation board was set up to go after you. That's what the documents say. By the way, election integrity, same story. The documents specifically mention that they needed to be a disinformation board because some people were having questions about election integrity. Some people had questions about January 6th. Well, we couldn't have that, and this board was set up to monitor that. That was what was in their sights. And I tell you, Tucker, it just gives the lie to what they were saying in public.
When they put any conservative that speaks out, they either ban those who don't put the message that they want, and then they go after putting you in prison. And Jim Jordan's, all of his hearings, along with James Conway, have highlighted this. Now, I do think the American people want to see consequences for big tech. We've got to be able to sue them, and we've got to be able to try to get a handle on them. But if we lose our sense of free speech, which we're doing, if we lose our sense of, being able to say what we think and do what we think, then we lose our country. And that's why we've got to stop it. And Jordan's group, hopefully will uncover a lot of it. And it can't go on like this.
And so that's why they want to rob others of the ability to say anything. And they are the ones crying that there's misinformation out there. They seek to protect others from misinformation. The chief misinformants. They want to stop you from being able to speak, from being able to ask the right questions. Because dictators don't like to be asked questions. All they ever want is submission. They say, do what we say, that's all. Even God allows questions. Who do these think they are? Jesus was asked questions. When you tell the truth, you're not afraid of being asked questions. They don't like to be questioned. They don't like opposing voices. They don't like dissenting voices. But when you tell the truth, you don't mind such things because you got answers for them.
Another evidence of the war on free speech is how certain countries have enacted a bad law that stipulates that owners of social media platforms will be held culpable for anti-globalist narratives posted on their platforms.
For example, in certain countries where they said that if you own a platform, a social media platform, you'll be held responsible for the things that are said on that platform by anybody that are not right.
You're being held responsible for what is another person's defamatory remark. You're being held responsible for your choice in broadcasting that defamatory remark to millions and millions of people who wouldn't have seen it otherwise through this pro-defamatory algorithm. I mean, and the question is, should 230 really be taken to go that far?
Just recently, I think it was Senator Kennedy of the United States who was questioning the CEO or founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. And while he was questioning him, he made a statement. He said, platforms like yours are no longer just companies. He said they are like countries.
The fact is that you and some of your internet colleagues who are not here are no longer, you're not companies, you're countries.
So in a sense, he was saying to Mark, you're like the leader of a country. You're like the head of a country. And they forced some of those platform owners to accept such a responsibility. That anyone that's posting what they call misinformation or disinformation or making false claims on those social media platforms They said the owner of the platform will be held responsible. Doesn't that mean, by simple correlation, that the presidents and prime ministers of countries should therefore be held accountable for the crimes committed in their countries? That's what it means.
With all of the controversies that have trailed the war on free speech, everyone in God's elect must understand that it is part of their deceptive strategy to install a world of totalitarianism.
Just remember, they as part of their deception, they declared war on free speech, a war which they lost before it started. Because this is not their time. After we've gone, which will not be by their order, we go when Jesus sounds the trumpet. So the fight against free speech, the war against free speech, is a subterfuge. It's a pretense, a clandestine effort to make the narrative of one side the dominant voice, for one reason and one reason only: totalitarianism. And that's why those of you who are saints of God everywhere, pray against this thing, because they don't know what they are doing. Those laws must be overthrown. All of us who are adults, we came into a world, we were born into a world that many others fought to have free speech. Fought and they got it. They fought the tyrants. And we are heirs of a free world. What do you want to bequeath to your children? You're going to lose that? And deliver your children into a world of darkness, a world of fear? Don't accept it. Don't allow it.
I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Matthew 16 verse 19.